Okay, today I'm in Kent with Claude Duval, 47 years racing correspondent of the Sun. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today, Claude. Now, you were Sun racing correspondent, as we said, for 47 years, but you actually owe your start in your career to cricket.
Very much so. I applied for so many local papers here in Kent, and I never got an opening, never had an interview anywhere. And then I wrote to a paper in Hastings, and they were part of a big group. And I managed to get a job at Crawly Newtown, Crawly District Observer, £5 a week, lovely. And the first job I ever had in journalism was the Three Bridges Cricket Club dinner dance, which was on a Saturday night, and the news editor gave me a ticket, and I thought, free ticket to a dinner dance, this is something. Then I realised that nobody else on the paper wanted to spend a Saturday night with total strangers, so I was the last man in, so I got the job. And I met people there, and they said to me, do you play cricket? And I said, I live for cricket. My father has taught me about this, and it's my life. And so that was my first job in journalism, was this cricket club dinner dance. And at the end of the evening, I'd become friends with a lot of them, and one of the chairman was a man called Alan Perkins, who then ended up working for William Hill. And he said, do you like cricket? And I said, he said, why don't you come play for us? Long story, I played for Three Bridges for years and years and years. We became Sussex League champions. And one of our fixtures was against Walton-on-Thames. And one of their players was a chap called Steve Whiting, whose uncle was the great legendary boxing writer on the Standard, George Whiting. And he rang me out of the blue in the middle of the summer on the Crawly Observer, and he said, how would you like to join the Sun newspaper, the new Sun newspaper, which Murdoch is starting in November? And I said, well, I'd love to. I said, but everybody's dream to work in Fleet Street. But I said, you don't know whether I can write a headline, whether I can do that. And he said, no. He said, the sports editor, Frank Nicklin, he's crazy to have a cricket team that can beat the Mirror. And I've told him this bloke can bowl off spin. He'll bowl them out as a pastime. So I ended up in Endell Street, met Nicklin, and the interview lasted 10 minutes. And he said, you bowl off spin then, do you? So I said, yeah. And he said, well, you're in. So I started on the Sun, November the 16th, 17th, back in 1969. None of them knew that I was any good at all, but our first front page lead was racing sensation, horse doping, which I helped them out on a bit in a very junior way. And because of that, the Sun racing correspondent, a chap called Don Cox, resigned after 3 days. And he said haughtily, Englishmen don't dope horses. But I'm afraid they did, and this Sussex trainer, Roy Pettit, he admitted he'd done that at Glorious Goodwood and etc. etc. So there was a vacancy there for a Sun racing correspondent, and Clive Graham recommended somebody from the Express who was one of the great doyens, and it transferred. He recommended him because this person was absolutely useless. And I used to see Frank Nicklin in all the pubs, and I said to him, this bloke's no good at all. He's a joke. He was Clive Graham's chauffeur. You bought a puppy here. And Nicklin, he braced himself 2 or 3 times, and I was beginning to play a few shots by then, and I told him the story, and he said, right, Duval, do an interview with somebody in racing who's never been interviewed before. If it's success, the job's yours. And I went to Lingfield on my day off, and there was another man I was fascinated by, Captain Ryan Price, who I'd seen at all the tracks round here, Kent and Sussex. And I thought, well, this is it. And he'd had a winner in the first race, and I plucked up courage and I walked across to him and I said, Captain, my name's Claude Duval of the Sun. I'd love to do an interview with you if that was at all possible. Well, I won't repeat what he said. It was unbelievable. I mean, ex-commando language. And I thought, Christ, it's not quite what I wanted to hear. But I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. And I followed him. And he turned round, he had the old trilby on, and he turned round as if to say, what the hell are you following me for? And I said, it really would help my career. And he sort of looked me up and down, and he said, "Be at my yard tomorrow, 12 o'clock, and don't be a minute late." And I went down there to Findon, which was, I had my own flat in Crawley at the time, and it took me about 40 minutes to drive down there on the outskirts of Worthing. And I drove past, it's a true story, I drove past the front gate about 10 times before I had the courage to drive in. And I pulled in, and I could hear him shouting and yelling in the stables, which was rather strange, because next door to the soldiers' field yard was a nunnery. I could see all these nuns walking around through the trees, and I could hear this ex-commando barking at everybody, absolutely slaughtering all his staff. And I thought, oh dear God. And I went in the house. He had the first reclining chair I'd ever seen, and he pressed a button and he went, and his feet went up in the air, and he opened his heart to me. He'd never been interviewed, never once. All these great writers, they never interviewed him. But he must have thought, oh, I've got to take pity on this young man. And I asked him all about Hill House. I asked him all about the great gambles, being warned off over Rosyth. And I got in my car and I drove back to the George Hotel in Crawley into the Dragon Bar. And I went into the far corner with my notebook. And I wrote this, and then I went in and telephoned it over as copy. And next day when I went into the Sun office, Nicklin said, "I want to see you in the Tipperary pub at 6:30. He did everything in the pub. Hire, fire, everything was done in the various Fleet Street pubs. "I want you in the Tipperary at 6:30 tonight." And I said, "Yeah, okay, Frank, is everything all right?" And he said, "Everything all right?" He said, "Ryan Price, he did say all those words, did he?" I said, "Yes, he did." He said, "I can't believe it." And of course, I was so lucky. I got the job as racing correspondent, and I was so blessed, because I looking back, and I've thought about it so many times, if what Price had said to me and I turned and walked away, what would my life have been? You know, I'd probably be on the Crawly Observer, following Crawley Town in the bloody Southern League or whatever for a life. But so dreams do come true, and I was lucky, because when I first got involved in racing, because my father allowed the local hunt, if you used his land and he was a farmer, you got free tickets to the Charing Point to Point. And in the early 50s, 60s, that's where I learnt, you know, I saw all the colours, I heard the bookmakers, and I fell in love with it. And I never dreamt I'd write about it, never ever, you know. So I've been very, very lucky. And as I say, when I started, Arkle was just about doing his stuff. You know, he won 22 chases out of 26. I'm an absolute fraud, because I have to tell you, I only ever saw Arkle twice in the flesh. Once was in 65 when he ran in the Hennessy, tried to give away £35 to Stallbridge Colonist, got beat half a length. I was there that day. We couldn't believe it. Arkle had been beaten. But when you look at the record books, it was a tremendous performance to get so close, conceding, you know, all that weight. And then, sadly, I was at Kempton in Boxing Day 1966. This is before the Sun even started. I was just there as a great fan. He got beat in the King George, and Pat Taff sat absolutely motionless on him from the last, and Dormant came out of the clouds for Jeff King and beat him. And we all thought, you know, what's Pat Taff up to? He hasn't moved. He's like a soldier, just sitting there. And everybody thought, and then of course it became very clear that Arkle was in distress. He'd broken a pedal bone, and of course he never ran again. But by which time the Sun had started, you know, a few years later, and Pat Taff became a lovely interview for me. We went and saw Arkle's grave in Ireland and all the rest of it. And that's when I learnt from my mother, who's from Northern Ireland, the tremendous love of horse racing, or horses, more important, that people in Ireland have. And that, to this day, they'll never, ever lose that. And then I suppose, going back to the last years of my career on the Sun, and the great shining light was Frankel. 14 races, never beaten, fantastic horse. And it was so ironic that Henry Cecil had been so friendly to me when I started. It should be the last big race winner and horse he had. But then by which time he was absolutely ravaged with the effects of the drugs for cancer. And when we all saw him at York for the last time, oh, absolutely tragic, you know. I remember somebody who I won't name, who was a big racing expert, or so he thought, and he told me after Frankel had won the Guineas, was it like 6 lengths in the end, made all, blistered the Rolly Mile up. He'll never win another race, CD. He'll never win another race. He's blown it. He's blown it. He'll never forget this race, and he'll never do it again. And he's stuffed. He'll never win another race. Well, of course, he got that slightly wrong. And my one regret about Frankel was that they never tried him over 1.5 miles, because I think he had so much class. He could have been easily have been a Derby winner. But I'm so blessed that I started with Arkle in his prime, and I ended up with Frankel. 2 of the best horses I've ever seen, or anybody's ever seen.